Welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Albert Cho. Since 2016, the relationship between the United States and China has been on a decline. Surveys from the U.S. show a trend where American citizens are viewing Taiwan more favorably, while their perspective on China have become more critical. However, does this shift in public opinion suggest that Americans support their government's military involvement in the potential crisis in Taiwan? Joining us today are Peifen Hsieh, Demographic Progressive Party spokesperson and the Department of International Affairs Director. Ronan Fu, Academia Sinica Institute of Political Science, Assistant Research Fellow. A very warm welcome to both on the show.
Thank you.
In the middle of 2022, the Global Taiwan Institute, so-called GTI, carried out a poll to gauge the feelings of Americans towards China and Taiwan. The results show China with an average rating of 4.01, while Taiwan scored higher at 6.06. There's been a steady increase in positive views of Taiwan among Americans, juxtaposed with a steady decrease in positive sentiments toward China. So what could be the factors driving this change in public opinion? Peifen, you go first.
If I may share another Pew Research Institute poll, it's conducted in April this year, and from this Pew Research Center's poll, we can see that 83% of Americans have an negative attitude toward China, while 40% of Americans view China as their enemies, not just competitors. From this, we can see that in the United States, people are viewing China very negatively. But it's not only a scenario in the United States, but in the whole world. More and more people are viewing negatively toward China, while their attitude toward Taiwan has become more and more friendlier. I think there are a few reasons why there is this change. The first is the COVID-19. So during the COVID-19, we can see that a lot of countries in the world have experienced the lockdowns in their cities, and it's a lot affected people's life, daily life, and that all come from the Chinese Wuhan. So it's a very negative public image of China on the world stage. And the second reason is that the Chinese war of diplomacy has become more and more aggressive. Before, China has this they have kept a low profile on the world stage. But in recent years, China has become more and more aggressive, has become more and more even violent and brutal in many countries. As we can see in France, the Chinese ambassador was very impolite toward the French public figures, and in many other countries as well. This all affected the people's attitude toward China in the whole world. And also, we have also seen the Indo-Pacific region has become more and more unstable because of the Chinese ambitions, and because of Chinese ambition. And all this adds up that resulted in a very negative attitude toward China among people across the countries.
Okay, Ronan, I remember a long time ago, maybe 20 years ago, in the United States, the public opinion towards China was not so bad, right? I mean, a lot of people were kind of into the Chinese food and culture, and even the pop industry. But why was the change over the sudden? If Peifen, she suggested, since 2016, there was a change. Why was that?
Yeah, so regarding the public polls, where you are using the data from the data presented here, GTI, or the Pew Research Center, or the research I currently conducted, it will suggest that basically a couple of reasons why this mistrust among China is quite prevalent. So the predominantly the most important factor is basically China's autocratic regime type. So the fact that basically in the early 90s, people still are very optimistic about China's democratization future. The notion being China could be democratized anytime soon due to their very impressive economic rise. But that turns out to be misplaced optimism. So that explains why, when people get frustrated in terms of China's political reform perspective. People become less patient about China's possible political reform. That explains why, mistrust or distrust among American people is quite prevalent. And point number two, sort of to piggyback on Peifen's point, China's behavior, China's foreign policy, to be more precise, is the second reason why a lot of people, including pundits, politicians, or ordinary people, they view China with a very untrusting eyes. So that includes what Peifen just mentioned, China's territorial behavior in territorial disputes, and also how they engage with other people domestically, or on public. They try to become very assertive, and their assertive behavior basically contribute to people's viewing China in a quite negative light. And there are a couple other reasons China's behavior will be basically criticized by other people. So I just mentioned the stance in territorial disputes, and what also important is their arms procurement policy and also the human rights policy. So in general, if the human rights policy is not very amicable toward the minority groups, people will take notice, and that will basically fit into mistrust toward China.
Okay, that helps us to understand the public sentiment among Americans. But Ronan, could you further discuss how the perceptions of U.S. citizens toward China may impact Washington's policy decision regarding, in the future term?
Yeah, so it's a very important, and it's actually quite debated topic in literature and also in the public domain of United States. And the key reason is that the United States is a democracy. And as a political leader, you want to get elected. You want to maintain that, you are very popular in public. So public opinion matters in the sense that you have to take into consideration in terms of how people think, in terms of your policy. So if the case that, there's mistrust among American public, then Joe Biden or any incoming American president would have to take that into account. If they, for example, try to pursue a policy that is more amicable, they need to realize, okay, so if that's going to be a very unpopular policy, they might hurt themselves in terms of popularity. They might hurt their political parties. So as a leader in democracies, you really have to take notice in terms of what the public opinion might be unfolding in the future. So that explains why public opinion matters in the
election matters,
yes.
Right? Okay, so Peifen, let's shift the attention to Taiwan. So in your memory, has there been any historical moments when a shift in terms of neutrality or even negativity towards Taiwan, now we are talking about Taiwan, among U.S. citizens resulted in U.S. government enhancing its relationship with China, or the other way around?
I guess one instance is after the breakout of the economic crisis in 2008, because of the United States needs Chinese to increase their economic growth, they had become more amicable toward China. But in more recent developments, what I have seen is a more harsh stance on China among American citizens and governments. One instance is that since August, we have seen 24 states in America, including Florida, Utah, South Carolina, and other states, who have proposed or even passed legislations that restrict the Chinese citizens' purchase of land and properties in their respective states. We can see that was passed in their legislative bodies in respective states. That means that's the people's will. They do not want the Chinese citizens' purchase of their properties in their own states. And also a second instance is the recent pass of legislation that was the Taiwan Policy Act and the 21st Trade Initiative that was passed by U.S. Congress, and that was also supported bipartisan. So we can see as the U.S. citizens' attitude toward China and Taiwan have led to the passing of this lead to the passing of these legislations. And also the third instance that was also happening very recently is when U.S. President Biden signed off a $80 million grant to Taiwan for the purchase of military equipment. And that is the first time that the U.S. is using its taxpayers' money to support a country that it does not have official diplomatic relations. So I think this all signal that the U.S. citizens' attitudes is also very important in affecting the government's decision toward Taiwan and China.
Okay, it's good that you mentioned the later two cases where the United States treated Taiwan better compared with before. But I think the tricky part was that if we kind of go back a long time ago, was there any case, maybe Roman, you can answer this question, any case that the United States, the public opinion among Americans towards Taiwan was not so good, and that kind of does not do anything good to the U.S.-Taiwan relations in the past?
Yeah, so in the past, basically, because Taiwan is a very robust democracy, so in general, American public will basically have a somewhat favorable point or opinion toward Taiwan. But the tricky part is that due to the complex reality across the Taiwan Strait. So whenever Taiwan is considered as a troublemaker, that will perhaps, upset the American optimism. But obviously, Taiwan has basically endorsed a policy of maintaining status quo. So that doesn't really happen quite often. Some people will argue that during the Chen Shui-bian administration, so some tension across the Taiwan Strait actually contribute to American distrust toward Taiwan. But it should be noted that it's not quite the case that predominantly American people dislike Taiwan. It's just that they are afraid the possible American intervention perhaps will jeopardize American national interest. So at the end of the day, it's all consideration over their national interest.
Okay, U.S. military intervention in the Taiwan Strait. That's a good start. Let's start from here. Enhancing diplomatic ties with Taiwan from the American perspective is one thing, but being prepared to endorse among the U.S. citizens to support U.S. military action to aid an ally such as Taiwan is quite another, right? So in my understanding that Ronan, you has a very excellent research in this area. Could you elaborate what you found so far?
Okay, so in the recent research that I conducted with my student, Elaine Lee, so what we basically found is that there are three important factors really stand out in determining whether American people will be supportive of the government decision to come to military rescue for another country. So number one, the most important factor being, whether this mission is very likely to be a success or not. And as you can see that from the chart, if you can convince American people that it's going to be a home run, it's almost a certainty that if the U.S. comes to your rescue, the mission will be very successful. And you can see that actually the predicted probability of American people supporting the decision to come to rescue is very close to 75 percentage point. It's fairly high. If you let American people believe that this mission is going to be a huge failure, as you can see that the predicted probability of American people supporting you or endorsing this decision to come to your military rescue is fairly low. It's very close to 20 percentage point. And there are two other factors that are also very important. The second being U.S. military casualties. So the larger number of casualties, the lower likelihood for American people to support you. And finally, you have to secure bipartisan consensus in terms of the military mission. If you fail to secure consensus between Republicans and Democrats, general public will be less favorable toward the decision to come to rescue. So that basically lay out the three important factors.
Yeah, so if I take this as a whole picture, as long as the cost of the U.S. military intervention in the Taiwan Strait decreases, that will increase the willingness of the U.S. public to support such military intervention in Taiwan.
Yeah, so you can absolutely say so, because if you really think about it, so the first criteria being the likelihood of success. Mm-hmm. If the mission is more successful, then obviously that will lead to, the lower magnitude of the cost. Mm-hmm. And casualty speaks the same way, right? And then finally, consensus. The reason why people can arrive at a consensus usually is because they feel like it's almost like a win situation. Mm-hmm. So they expect no failure in the future. So that's the reason why they tend to be more supportive. And the decision to come to Taiwan's rescue will become a bipartisan consensus.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Peifen, so considering the insights from Ronan's study, which was very remarkable to me, what guidance would you offer to the governments and military of Taiwan?
That reminds me of one saying that says, God helps those who help themselves. Mm-hmm. Americans also help those who help themselves. So one thing that increased the likability of a success is the ability of our self-defense. Mm-hmm. If we can defend ourselves when there's an attack, then there's the likelihood of the U.S. willingness to send help to Taiwan will also increase. We can see this very clearly from the situation of Ukraine. In the first instance, when Russia invaded Ukraine, the whole world thinks that the Ukraine will not resist enough until the other countries came to their rescue, but they did. So all the countries came to Ukraine's rescue. So I think one suggestion I would give is that we really have to increase our ability of self-defense. We have to increase we have to improve our equipment, our training of our military, and the willingness of our citizens to defend ourselves. I think this will all show to our allies that we have the ability and we are willing to defend ourselves.
Mm-hmm. But the U.S. China relations has not been always deteriorating, right? I mean, it goes ups and down. Early on, maybe just in the aftermath of 2016, we saw there's a downturn in the relationship between U.S. and China. But now it looks like it goes up again. President Biden and President Xi Jinping has been actively communicating. Can you give us a summary of the latest diplomatic interactions between the two countries? And what are your forecasts? Do you expect that President Xi to take a more friendly approach to the U.S. in terms of military and trade relations going forward? Ronan. Yeah.
Okay, so before I actually delve into the question, I would like to share another chart, which is based on my recent research on how American people assess the trustworthiness of China. As everybody can see from the chart, basically it lays out the predicted probability of American people perceiving China as trustworthy, depending on their foreign policy orientation. And as you can see from the chart, if China appears to not reassure anybody, then as you can see, only 18% predicted probability reveal that people basically distrust China and consider China as untrustworthy. But as you can see, if China can basically increase their cooperation with the United States, the trust toward China fully increased and enhanced. If China can become a responsible stakeholder in the international community, if China can reassure everybody in some key foreign policy initiatives, including their stance in territorial disputes, the human rights policy, how they purchase arms defensively or offensively, and finally, how they boost their regime legitimacy through the emphasis on economic growth or through boosting nationalist sentiments. If you can reassure everybody, as the chart shows, you can convince other people that you are going to be a trustworthy country. And going back to your question, I basically think that Xi Jinping and Biden are going to engage in a serious discussion in terms of how to craft a more amicable bilateral relationships. So I think China will try to do something to reassure the United States that it will appear less assertive and less aggressive. But I also see some obviously obstacles ahead of the possible cooperation or cooperative relationship between United States and China. And the main reason is twofold. Number one is that China's power is still on the rising trajectory. That will inevitably, create some structural tension between the United States and China, because regardless you being a politician or you are an ordinary citizen, you will be very concerned over a country that will be replacing your country as a hegemonic power. So that's number one. And secondly, there's a certain limitation in terms of how Xi Jinping can do in terms of reassuring the rest of the world, and including Taiwan and in the United States. It has a very deep nationalist root in terms of domestic politics. So he has to convince, his nationalist, basically citizens that, engaging reassurance will pan out. And that's going to be a very challenging task for Xi Jinping.
Peifen, actually, Ronan mentioned the political dimension, right? And my question also include the commercial relations, right? So we know that China now has been experiencing economic downturn, if not recession, if not too that far. So would you say that President Xi is in a hurry or kind of in this need to engage Biden again for improve somehow the domestic economy in China, and that would make Xi more friendly to President Biden?
Indeed, China is experiencing economic downturn. The unemployment in China among the youth is very high, and that's something very serious in the Chinese society. So I do think that the President Xi has this urgency, feels this urgency to improve its relations with the United States. But on the other hand, I am less optimistic about the relationship between U.S. and China, because the Chinese government is not a democratic one. It's all of its important decisions are made by one man and one man only, and that's President Xi Jinping. As what we can see from the recent development in the Chinese domestic politics, we can see that the disappearance of the defense minister, the disappearance of the foreign relations minister. We can see that the decision circle of President Xi has become more and more smaller and smaller, and that's one thing really worrying, because then the foreign relations that the PRC has toward the other countries, including the United States, will also be limited. So although President Xi feels the urgency, the need to improve its relations with other countries in order to boost its economic growth, but on the other hand, it also has limited its decision-making circle, and that also hinders its ability to conduct more healthier relations with other countries. An improvement of U.S.-China relations probably will not be in favor of the Indo-Pacific stability, because an increased relations of the United States and China will mean that the U.S. will put there's a focus in this region, and then the Chinese, the aggression of Chinese will become more and more blunt in this region. So, but on the other hand, I do not think in the recent development, I do not believe that an improvement of U.S.-China relations will happen very recently.
And also the question goes to you, Ronan. Do you think that the better U.S.-China relationship is better for Taiwan's security?
Yeah, so I think the answer to this question really depends on how they are able to craft a good relationship. If what they are trying to do is to sacrifice other countries' national interest, then obviously I think that's going to jeopardize in Taiwan's national security. But if basically what they can craft for a somewhat applicable relationship is competition within the boundary, meaning they are going to compete, for example, for the hegemonic role in the international system. but they are going to abide by the international norms and orders, then I think that that kind of healthy competition does not necessarily put Taiwan's national security in jeopardy. Yeah, so that really depends on how they are able to strike that amicable relationship.
Okay, the last minute question for each of you. So according to Ronan's research suggests that the U.S. military readiness to support Taiwan in a conflict with the PLA is contingent on the operational cost, right? So what else should we do other than the secure the military hardware and equipment for the United States? Could you propose ways to bolster the determination of Taiwanese people, especially among the youth, to protect their country? Peifen.
Oh, well, I think we really have to boost our own confidence in ourselves. So from the case of Ukraine, we can see that even asymmetrical power can, such as the Ukraine and Russia, their war has lasted for over 1 year. And that's because of the determination of Ukrainian people to defend themselves. And that really is a very important lesson to Taiwanese people. So we have to increase our ability of self-defense. We have really to train our own people to, in case of an invasion or an attack. And that's very important. I think the education on this importance of increasing our self-defense ability is one priority that the government should do.
Right, Ronan.
Yeah, so I agree with everything Peifen said. I would like to double down on the importance of you really have to show resolve that you want to protect your very variable democratic system so that people will be bought into that narrative and be willing to defend our own country. Thank you.
Okay, Ronan and Peifen, thank you for the important analysis.
Okay, thank you.
We've discussed Taiwan's security from a unique perspective. What do ordinary Americans think about Taiwan and China? Did you enjoy our show? Leave us a message and subscribe to Taiwan Talks. See you soon.